If you grew up noticing who you were drawn to, but then immediately shutting that down, these scenes from Heated Rivalry might feel uncomfortably familiar to you.
So, look, we can forget that happening there, okay?
Is what you want?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, you're a really bad liar.
Well, today is an homage to the men I crushed on and maybe loved a little bit quietly in the shadows. And today is also an honoring of my feelings that I kept in the closet for way too long. Hi, I'm Dr. Dave, and welcome back to the Good Life Lab, where we experiment with and explore tools, tips, and techniques for just improving our lives. I'm a therapist and college professor turned content creator, and I'm in the midst of this series that I'm excited about that is taking scenes and themes from Heated Rivalry and just talking about them kind of from my perspective as a therapist and a positive psychology researcher. So I'm calling this current series From Heated Rivalries to Real Loving Relationships, trying to bring us from the fantasy world of what Rachel Reed and Jacob Tierney created and the actors talking about that, celebrating that, but then also trying to apply some of the lessons learned, some of the reflections from that series to our own lives, bringing those things back down to earth. Basically, I just want to help us all, while we're enjoying the fantasy of it all, help us live healthier, happier lives in the midst of our celebration and enjoyment of the series. So I found that I've been thinking about this romantic fantasy series and finding myself enjoying it, and also then reflecting on what is my life like. Am I missing anything that is drawing me to this? Mostly it's just helping me be grateful and celebrate the things that I do have and the love that I do have in my life. So that's good that it's not taking me out of my relationships, but helping me embrace and enjoy and celebrate the good that I have in my life. And I hope the same for you. Today's episode, I'm calling The Heated Rivalry Within. And it revolves around an exercise that I do with my clients sometimes, depending on kind of where they're coming from. And it's something I was introduced to in graduate school. I think my professor at the time, it was a human sexuality course. I think he talked about it as a sexual history. And you hear that in kind of a medical context as well. But this is, I've changed it, adapted a little bit to our purposes today. So it's not as maybe intense as you might get in a sexual history review. So it's sort of like a sexual history light. Sometimes in a sexual history, you'll get to some of the more traumatic things that have happened in your life. And even if it's not a major trauma in life, though we've all been through some traumas, even in relationships. And so I'm going to just talk through those kinds of things that brought me energy, where I felt alive throughout my life, and maybe a little bit of trauma or difficulty, but mostly just looking at the good feelings and being drawn to somebody. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from today and walking you through that. So what is a romantic energy history in my context, and how am I using it? So first of all, it's not a confession, although I will talk about things that I probably wouldn't normally talk about with friends and family. I'll get a little bit deeper than everyday conversation with people. It's not a tally of relationships I've had, and it's not a replacement for therapy. So as I said, I'm a therapist, but this is not therapy. Hopefully that if you find a need to do this with yourself or with somebody else, kind of review some of your relationship history, that if anything triggering comes up, that you will see a therapist about it. So that's kind of the context here. But what a romantic energy history is all about, it's a noting of attraction without shame. It's an honoring of longing that maybe you didn't allow yourself to act on at the time. It's a way of giving language to experiences that maybe felt wordless. So that's kind of the context, what it is, what it isn't, for what this romantic energy history that I'm going to walk through from my perspective today. And maybe you will too. And again, if you feel like it's something that's more in depth or intense, you do need to talk through some traumatic experiences, please see a therapist. This should not be taken as a replacement for therapy. So this episode is all about heated rivalries. those crushes, those attractions, those experiences that we've had as gay men that may have gone unacknowledged, unspoken perhaps, unrequited in some situations, and even unappreciated by ourselves or by others of the significance that they held for us at the time. So let's bring those memories, those experiences, those longings into the sunshine. Because what?
He deserves sunshine. And so do you.
Yes. You, I, we deserve sunshine. I do plan to sprinkle some scenes from Heated Rivalry throughout this romantic energy history, and as, an homage to the series as well, but also as a way of explaining what I'm talking about in a visual way. And because we all need our heated rivalry fix. We're anticipating the new book that's coming out. I think the 7th book is coming out in September, projected, and then soon after that, the new 2nd season series. So looking forward to that, but I think we all want more. That's probably why you're watching this video. Like I said, I'm going to share my romantic energy history as a doorway for you to reflect on yours, and hopefully in a way that's freeing, that acknowledges and affirms what you've been through, but that brings you from maybe feeling shame about it or curiosity about it to an awareness, to a celebration of, to an honoring of those experiences. That's my goal for today. And let me just say one more time that if you find this triggering in any way, please see a therapist. I've been a therapist for a long time, and I know that's a confidential setting for people to talk about whatever comes to mind. So please do find somebody that you can do this with if you find it triggering. I've found the series, watching the Heated Rivalry series, somewhat triggering. And so, like I said last time, I've taken time with my therapist to just talk through some of the things why I'm drawn to this so much. Why am I being caught up in this series like I have been, and just taking time to analyze it, which has helped me just reflect on it, but to also kind of be grounded in reality some more. You can reach out to me as well. I work primarily with queer men, gay, bi, curious, heteroflexible, anybody who's questioning kind of where they are. Maybe you've come out, but you're still wrestling with some identity issues. I actually have some free introductory sessions, just a quick, brief introduction to try to get to know each other and see if it's a good fit. You can check that out in the description below. I'd love to talk with anybody who's kind of trying to find their footing in terms of their identity. Though I am a therapist, I work mostly with people that contact me now as a coach. So just so you know that as well. So as we get into this episode, which I've called My Heated Rivalry Within, and subtitled The Men I Love, The Rules I Obeyed, and the War and Eventual Peace Within, I'm going to give you a little bit more of a preface here. When I say heated rivalries, I don't mean enemies and even adversaries like Shane and Ilya, but rather these men symbolize something I wasn't allowed to want at the time. I didn't give myself permission to actually follow through with my desires. Instead, I felt more shame around those desires. I buried those desires. And so that's where the rivalry was, primarily with myself, my own feelings. So this episode really is about acknowledging that ache. It's about recognizing, affirming. It's about coming into the sunshine. And it's about self-compassion over beating myself up for these feelings. So with the idea of honoring my history with a sense of self-compassion, I'm going to end this episode with a letter of compassion to myself. And maybe you can do the same for yourself. Kind of taking all this angst and energy that you had growing up and throughout your life, and crafting a letter of compassion to yourself, to just give yourself some grace, maybe celebrate and reframe some of those negative energies that you felt towards yourself, the shame, the embarrassment, the frustration, all that can be reframed into this letter of compassion towards yourself. And so I'm going to end the episode with that. And so this letter of self-compassion, I'm hoping that as I talk through the sadness, the longings, the grief, the messiness, I'll be able to wrap it up into this great big ball of empathy and compassion and grace towards myself. That's the goal anyways. All right. So my first romantic energy moment. So I've tried to go back as far as I could. And I think there's some earlier than this, but I think it was around 8 or 9. I remember I was upstairs in my parents' bedroom watching TV, and everybody else was downstairs. And I think I knew this was happening, but we had moved from an old neighborhood when I was 3. I remember this neighborhood boy. He was probably my brother's age, which was about 8 years older than me. And he was coming to our new neighborhood to visit, so maybe 5 years or so. And I remember really liking him. Even at 3 years old, I was like drawn to him apparently, because at 8 or 9, I remember having those feelings of being like drawn to him, or like I really wanted to see him. I really liked him. I don't think it maybe was a romantic thing at the time, but pre-romance, I just feeling drawn to him. But I didn't go downstairs to greet him. Like I had my parents and I think my brother. And so they would have been 15, 16. This guy eventually went on to play college football. He was a kicker. And so, yeah, I was just torn. I was like really wanting to see him, but I was afraid of maybe people seeing my enjoyment of that and being embarrassed of that. So I didn't go downstairs. He was there for quite a while, and people kept coming up like, "Are you going to come downstairs?" And so I think it's one of my earliest memories of feeling a little bit shy, but also ashamed of those feelings towards this boy, even though it wasn't a romantic thing. It was just a drawing of, longing for. So that's my first kind of experience with that. And I really want to, as I go through this, find ways of expressing compassion for myself. So as I try to reframe this experience, a couple things I think I've learned from it. One thing was my desire was alive early, that I can identify that and maybe even bless that. That's a good thing. I can reframe it as my instinct maybe isn't about shame, but caution, that I didn't want people to find out what I was feeling. And so it was a protective kind of thing instead of a shameful thing. Maybe we can look at it that way. And maybe even think of this as I wasn't cowardly for staying upstairs. I was being protective of myself, of the feelings. I didn't have the language at the time to address this or talk about it, but it was those early feelings emerging and finding a way to protect myself against whatever I feared might happen. So that's my reframe for this first episode. I have 10 of these, by the way. So the second memory that came to mind when I thought about this romantic energy history was a little bit later. I think I was in late grade school or early middle school. So maybe 11, and going away to sleepaway camp for the first time. So my first time, then we did this as part of our school system. It was our first experience away from our family for a couple of days with other kids. We're all in cabins, the different grades. The boys are all in one cabin in different grades. And I remember there were teenage, probably high school, 17, 18-year-old camp counselors that would stay in the rooms with us. And there's one in particular that I was just so energized by, I'll say, so curious about. And so again, I was 11, he was probably 18, and just fully, grown, muscular. So this is kind of my next experience with that. I don't remember feeling a lot of shame, but certainly embarrassment to even think about approaching him. And so I didn't. But one way I could kind of bless and honor this energy was I was drawn to strength. I was drawn to somebody who seemed to be a caring, charismatic individual, and that was okay. That was good. In some ways, I had a loving father and family and loving older siblings, but I think maybe there's still some part of what I was looking for was a reinforcement of that, something I didn't have the affirmation as much as I wanted from my older brother and my father. And so I was longing for that as well. And so I think that as I look back on it, that could have been something I was feeling as I was drawn to this older man. But mostly it was just about attraction. I just really liked the way he looked. So we're moving into high school now, and I have a couple experiences in high school I'd like to share with you. So the first one is, I call it the high school coach's attention. And I had played soccer, as I said, throughout and was doing well. And there's some rumors about, I was just moving into high school. He was coming to, I think, middle school event because he was maybe scouting out some of the players, something like that. I think he was at this event. And I'd heard about him from my sister who was in high school. And apparently there was rumors about some of the players like me coming up to high school because we were standing out. And so he came to our table, and he was, very attractive, again, very charismatic in his own way. And so I was drawn to him, but also embarrassed to be drawn to him. When I was younger, when I got embarrassed, I would get very red, very noticeably. And so I think that's what happened. I would get a headache because I was so flushed for a long time, and I just couldn't have a conversation with him. So that happened a lot when I was nervous and attracted to somebody. I would get embarrassed and turn red. And so that's kind of what happened in high school. I can reframe this as blushing wasn't exposure. It was my nervous system responding to being seen and encouraged and noticed. You might also notice that there's a pattern that I was like being drawn to older men. It wasn't the only case, throughout my life, but early on I was like drawn to these older men, it seemed like. So this fourth episode is kind of counter to that, being drawn to older men. I call it the senior teammate fantasy. I think I was a sophomore. I made the varsity team, soccer team. So there's some older boys, just a couple years older than me, that attractive and people I was drawn to. But there was one in particular who showed me attention, picked me up for practice, and was kinder to me than the others. And so my fantasy life at the time was about me being with him and coming over to his house and enjoying an afternoon with him, whatever that might be. And so that was one of my early kind of teammate fantasies, was with this young man, a couple years older than me. How is this depicted in Heated Rivalry? And I think it relates to when Shane and Ilya were at the cottage kicking the soccer ball back. That was a lot of what was happening with me, kind of having that connection with other boys through sport. But what was different was I never had the experience of what they did. It was the soccer, the teammates, minus the romantic experiences. So I had this, but I didn't have this.
Is that what you want? To be together?
So much. So much it scares me.
I love you.
Holy shit. I love you too. Oh my God, I love you so much.
And this is, I think, about the time when fantasy became kind of a refuge to me, a place where desire could breathe without consequences. And I would say, as I reframe, imagination wasn't avoidance. It was a creative survival strategy when reality felt unsafe. There's another high school experience. During a summer, I was on vacation with my family, with other families, and one of the other families had a boy my age. And so I was, 14, 15 maybe at the time. I think he was maybe a year younger than me. And so I felt this, he was looking up to me, and we were just drawn to each other and had fun, in the pool and in the lake. And I remember my parents, I was just me there on vacation with them. At this time, my sisters and brother didn't come. They had a hotel room and I was right next to them. And this boy was able to stay with me for that time. We just had a blast. One of the few times I felt like I could be myself, not necessarily in my desires, fully, but there was a definite attraction to each other and an enjoyment of each other. And even some beginnings of some sexual, like flirtation, maybe. I don't know what to call it at 15, but there was that energy there. And, some of the things that happened. And so I remember we were just having fun in the room, and we were making a lot of noise. My dad came over next door and just told us to quiet down, and it kind of put a damper on things. But the the experience of being with that boy and feeling like there's maybe a mutuality there, but then also a regret after that, like wishing that something could have happened, but it didn't. And the beginning of one of those first experiences where I felt like there could have been something that transpired, but never did. And a regret afterwards and a longing for that fulfillment of that desire to happen, but it didn't. Okay, now we're into college years. I'll call this scene or memory 5: showers, prayer meetings, and college crushes. So as I said, I played college soccer, and the first year I was there, common practice of showering with boys and noticing them and feeling drawn to them. Ironically, for me, that never was a source of concern that I'd be aroused in a shower with my teammates. It just wasn't something I struggled with, but I certainly noticed them. This is also the season when my faith started to take root and I started to become more religious and more spiritual. And when I started to push down even more so those feelings of being drawn to other men, I wanted to change those feelings more so through prayer and fasting and prayer meetings. And so, but that didn't change my feelings. It just suppressed them some more. It was a period of me growing in my faith, which meant learning about what it means to be a Christian. And that involved praying and reading the Bible, praying with other men. Those times of praying with other guys, other people, became very intimate times. And often I would look forward to praying with other guys, especially the guys that I was attracted to, because it had a certain level of intimacy, emotional intimacy, and never having the thought that it would turn sexual, I don't think, but that's certainly something that crossed my mind during that time. When I was, my college years, in the showers and with prayer circles and having close bonds with other guys, but never experiencing anything, also reminded me of an experience when I met a friend in this Christian college group and just drawn to him. I felt like he was drawn to me as well. I think he was an underclass. I was probably a senior at the time. And we developed a friendship, and we'd go to the park and read and pray together and have these conversations. But I remember him being very affectionate towards me and not knowing how to, enjoying it, but not knowing how to handle it. I remember one time while we were at the end of one of our church gatherings, he just lightly kind of caressed almost my back. And it reminded me of Ilya and Shane in this scene.
Fine, but hurry up.
Great. Give me your number. I'll text them to you.
No chance.
So I had those experiences. There's affection in these college years, but not a fulfillment of my desire. So my spiritual devotion and my romantic desire didn't cancel each other out. They actually coexisted, and sometimes, usually painfully. I would push down or try to change those feelings for other men during that period of college. A reframe I think I can share here is that my faith wasn't a lie. I was sincere in wanting to be a devoted believer and follower of Christ. That was sincere, but I still had this desire. I was trying to hold these two desires in tension, which in itself brings a sense of perspective and wisdom, I think. When you have two things conflicting that you really believe and hold strong to, but they're in tension, that creates a sense of strength in itself when you're able to hold those two in tension. For me, it became decades. So that's kind of the reframe here, is it wasn't necessarily lost time, even though I have a lot of regret about it. I can also look at the things I learned during that time and the kind of character I developed during that time. Scene 7 or episode 7 is a little different from the previous ones. It involves kind of coming out to my parents initially, but it's significant because it was the first time I acknowledged to them my desire for other men. I was 22. But then it was a clear memory of me telling them, I don't want this feeling, and I'm going to try to change it. And I think I shared in the previous episode in this series that my parents' response was much more gracious towards me than I was towards myself. I think they would have been okay with me if I embraced my sexuality and my identity as a gay man at 22, because they had friends who had a son that was embracing that about himself. Like, coming out to my parents was very much like Shane coming out to his parents. There was no shaming from them at all. But for my part, I was still in the position of shaming myself, essentially. And I remember having this conversation, and very much like Shane had with his mom.
Mom, I need you to know that I did really try. I tried really hard, but I just can't help it. I'm sorry.
Oh no, you have nothing to apologize for. Look at me. Look at me.
He really tried. I was in the middle of trying, and which I would continue for another 20 years. But this is very much like what happened with my parents. But they, I think, just went along with what I was wanting to do, which is try to change. And so that's a significant time for me during that period of 22, finally confessing that this is how I feel for men, but then also having an equal desire to try to change. And that's what I did for the next 20 years, really. And so this is the era of, I'd been closeted until I was 22. Now I was open about being attracted to men, but not wanting to be. And so this is where the ex-gay spaces kind of come into play, and these ambivalent bonds that I was feeling towards men. And kind of the mantra at the time, the things I was learning in the world of the ex-gay movement was, your desire to be drawn to another man means that you're trying to repair something, that your relationship with your father, the same-sex parent, father in my case, was broken. Like something happened early in my life that broke our relationship. And so this draw for other men was my need to repair that brokenness. That was the psychology at the time. And so I bought into that. And part of that repair was to actually seek out relationships with men, non-sexual, that you could have an emotional connection. As long as you can have healthy, strong male bonding kind of experiences, that will diminish your need for sexualizing your relationships with other men. That's the theory at the time. And so I bought into that. This is where my romantic energy changed a little bit. I would actually pursue men that I was attracted to, but just have an emotional intimacy with them, which brought along with it very ambivalent feelings towards them. So love, kind of like, I want you, but I can't really have you the way I want you. So in these ex-gay conferences and spaces, we were all obviously drawn to other men. That's why we were there. We were alive with desire in these spaces, but also locked in battle with ourselves. Like, there's very attractive men. We know we have attraction for each other, but we have to deny that attraction for each other. It's very much like this scene when Shane and Scott are in the cafe together and they're talking about the Olympics, I think it was. And there's acknowledgement that you don't know that Shane and Scott are both gay, and they don't, maybe not even out to many other people at the time, but there's something going on here that you just can't talk about. And so that's how it was in these spaces. So I was in these ex-gay spaces. I actually taught at ex-gay conferences for a while. A lot of my colleagues at the time, when I was in my, late 20s to late 30s, I was pretty heavily involved in these conferences. And there was clearly an ex-gay movement. There was a declaration at these conferences that we are ex-gay. We no longer feel drawn to other men. I can never bring myself to the point of saying that because I had always had feelings for other men and nothing was changing. But I still was faithful for the most part to try to change. So this brings me to now scene 9 or memory 9 in my romantic energy history. I call it the question that changed everything for me. It was in my early 40s. So I don't know if I've talked about this as part of this series yet, but I would do these year-long kind of challenges for myself to learn things. I did one at 40. Now I was 42, I think, 43. And I was wanting to come out, wanting to be okay with myself, but having a hard time doing that. And so I created this year-long project called 12 Months to Live. What would I do if I had 12 months to live? I asked myself. And I did something different every month for that year to help me identify my maybe my calling in life, what I really enjoyed, but also underlying it was just to be happy because I was very depressed not being out, and part of that was to come out and to also come alive. And so halfway through that year, I started in July this project, and it was December, and the theme for that month was to let love guide me. It's from a verse from the Bible. I was still trying to be religious and spiritual, so I took this as a theme for that month. Let love be your guide. And to me, that meant at the time just having this idea in my mind, like wake up every morning and letting love guide me. What would love do today? And it affected my day-to-day interactions with people at the grocery store, my family. But I didn't expect this to happen. So I was staying with a seminary friend. So we both had this very conservative outlook most of our lives, and thought that being gay was not okay, not what God wanted. But while I was with him, this is the question that changed everything. He said, why don't you just accept this part of yourself? And I guess I was at a place that I tried for so long to not be gay, but I was wanting to accept this part of myself, but still struggling with it. And he just gave me a sense of permission from somebody I respected, somebody who had the same perspective, but his outlook on life was shifting. And so that gave me permission to start to be okay with it. He gave me an example of a friend of his who went to seminary, was known for trying not to be gay in seminary, but very public about his struggles, but had come across friends while in seminary who asked him that same question, why don't you just accept this part of yourself? And so he began to. He told me about this guy, introduced me to him. So this is when that shift started to happen inside me. I started to accept myself. And I remember going to bed in his guest room that night and just being so excited that I could begin to pursue a relationship with somebody, or begin just dating guys, or just being attracted, letting myself be attracted to other guys, feeling so alive. For the first time, I'd had these experiences throughout my life, but there's always some shame attached to them. For the very first time in my early 40s, I began to embrace and allow myself to be okay with these attractions. It was very much like the Rose and Shane conversation, where she gives him permission to be okay with this part of himself.
Can I ask if you've ever been with another guy? Have you ever told anyone that before? Was it different with a guy?
Of course.
Was it better?
Yeah, it was better. The thing is, I kind of prefer being the hole rather than the peg.
Wow. That is the best thing any gay boyfriend of mine has ever told me.
So for the very first time in my early 40s, I felt like I could finally be okay with who I was. That this question from my friend was a trigger for, why don't I just accept myself for who I am? So this 40-year battle with myself, I was finally beginning to experience peace. I had peace within myself for the first time, just allowing myself to be drawn to men and be okay with that. So this leads me to number 10, final kind of scene, episode, or scenes, I'll say, was post this question of, why don't you just accept yourself? So that's the next season of my life. And actually, while I was on this 12 Months to Live project quest that I had to kind of figure out my life, I mentioned this man that my friend introduced me to. And so we connected. We met halfway. He was in New York. I was in Ohio. We met halfway to go hiking for the day and just have a day together. Obviously attractive, very drawn to each other. I found myself, even though at the time, because I hadn't had any experience with this is my first real experience with somebody I was drawn to, and I knew he was drawn to me as well. After the hike, we sat at this Cracker Barrel. He had his bare arms, and he had a tattoo on one of his arms. And I just really had this strong desire to touch his arm and caress it. And again, I did not allow myself to do that. So it was still this internal battle, even though I was accepting myself. being drawn to men, but still holding back. Dinner ended, and then we, as we were departing, and he was going back home that night, I wanted so much to say, can we just get a hotel room? And I wanted so much to just stay with him and be with him, but we departed and at least hugged each other. It must have been December that same year. And then in January, I was going to Costa Rica as part of my 12 months to live. And I remember exchanging texts with him and talking to him that way. And then for the next 6 months, there was a little bit of contact with each other, but not a lot. So I went about my 12 months project and did, every month for the year, did something different. I went to the base camp of Everest. I worked with the United Nations World Food Program in Nepal. I ended in Australia. And then I came back to the States, and I was writing a book while I was doing this. And so I ended the year in Michigan and invited my friend that I met during this year to come to the cottage with me, very much like Ilya and Shane going to the cottage for the first time together. Even though Ilya and Shane had contact with each other throughout the 10 years and were able to fulfill their desire on multiple occasions, and even their feelings evolved and became more of a love for each other over those 10 years, they didn't have this time together like they would at the cottage. And so that's what I was looking for with my friend that I had romantic feelings for. And so I invited him to the cabin, my friend's cabin. Nobody else was there, on a lake, very much like Ilya and Shane. And we just had this glorious weekend together and was able to fulfill much of what I wanted in terms of my first experience with another man. And I can go into more detail, but I'll save that. I'm actually writing a book about this experience, so I'll save the graphic detail for the books. So my cottage experience with my friend, we had an on again, off again kind of thing for a year or so. Traveled to Africa, did a few things, but being so far apart and just, the dynamics of me coming out for the first time and really not knowing how to navigate a dating romantic relationship really got in the way of anything, I think, from my perspective. But it prepared me for my 14-year relationship with my partner. I want to leave most of that private on this channel. But I will say, when I first met him, we met through an old partner of his who became my, I guess, boyfriend a little bit for a little while. And then we broke up, and he connected the two of us, my partner and me, later on. And so we met for the first time at a farmer's market. He told me what he's going to be wearing, where he's going to be, and I saw him kind of leaning against a post. I remember kind of observing him before we met, and his posture was inviting. He was confident, but maybe nervous a little bit, but confident in that. And I was just drawn to him instantly when I saw him. And then a conversation, we talked, and we joke about some of the things that happened that first date. And then we sat down to eat in this farmer's market. And I just remember a conversation feeling like drawn to him, very much his physique. He listened, he engaged in conversation. And what I really enjoy in conversation, that there's a give and take, that I'll ask questions and I'll listen, and then really enjoy that when that's reciprocated as well. And so I felt like that was happening with him, which is another thing for me, that there's got to be a physical attraction, but there's also got to be some emotional and intellectual engagement as well, which was there. And then if we liked each other enough to go on the second date, our second date was Frisbee golf, so disc golf. And it's something I had done before. I don't think he had done before. And so I just introduced him to it. Right before our second date, I was waiting for him in the parking lot to meet up with him. And I was getting this really bad pain in my back. And so I had to get in the back of my truck at the time. And I just laid down because my back was hurting so much. I thought about calling him to cancel, but I really didn't want to. And so we went through with this. I don't know if I told him I was in pain, but the second hole of the disc golf, I threw up. And he just kind of let me be. He looked away. He didn't want to see me throwing up. And then every other hole after that, I would throw up in so much pain. And so we got to I think it was 16th hole. And I said, I need to go. I'm just not doing well. I liked him so much that I didn't want to leave. And I ended up going to my mom's and just telling her I think I need to go to the hospital. It turned out to be kidney stones. And the pain just forced me to throw up. But that showed me that he still wanted to engage with me after that, after seeing me throw up. And that led to our 14 years of loyal, loving partnership. I think he'll be watching this. So if you're watching this, thank you for 14 years of life together. And I love you. And through our difficult times and our good times, I'm so grateful for all that we've shared together over these 14 years. And I hope we have another 40 years together. So all of these experiences, all these memories and moments and scenes in my life, they're also quiet muses leading me to where I am now. And I can be grateful for that, for those experiences, those unfulfilled desires, which taught me a lot, which gave me a lot of strength, which gave me a lot of endurance, which gave me a sense of empathy and compassion and confidentiality, keeping secrets. All those things were lessons learned from these, 40 years of being in the closet, of longing for other men, of holding secrets for a long period of time. And it's made me, I guess, in many ways, more compassionate, empathetic towards other people that are going through the same thing. So even though I regret not fulfilling some of my desires throughout my life, I can also see and reframe things in a way that helps me see those experiences meaningful as not lost. And to be in a place where I feel like Ilya and Shane, when they're at the table with Shane's parents, and Ilya and Shane is kind of panicking, like regretting. I can go to that space easily if I wanted to, get to this panic of like, why didn't I let myself experience these things growing up? But also then channeling Ilya's response to Shane.
We're good here. My family is here. Your boyfriend is here. You're good here, okay?
My boyfriend?
I mean, yes. I think so, probably.
We're all good here. So to bring this to conclusion and to honor those difficult emotions that I experienced growing up, to reinforce and reframe those things in a more positive, compassionate way, I mentioned earlier that I'm going to read this letter of compassion to myself as an exercise for myself, but also as an example for you to think about doing for yourself, writing a letter of compassion for yourself and those things that you experienced growing up. So here's my letter. Dear Dave, I want to begin by saying this plainly. There was never anything wrong with you. Not when you were 9 or 10 years old and felt your heart race at the sight of an older boy. Not when you stood at the top of the stairs, wanting to go down and terrified of being seen. Not when you loved quietly, watched carefully, and learned far too early that desire could be dangerous. That longing you felt wasn't corruption, it was recognition. It was aliveness waking up inside a young body that had no language and no protection for what it was feeling. You didn't turn away because you were weak. You turned away because you were smart. You learned how to survive in the only ways available to you at the time. Every crush that followed at camp, on the field, in locker rooms and classrooms and prayer circles was not evidence of failure or sin. It was evidence of a heart that knew how to respond to beauty, strength, kindness, and presence. You didn't choose those feelings. They arrived because you were human. And when you told yourself you were sinful, broken, or wrong, you weren't being cruel. You were trying to stay safe. You're doing your best to protect belonging, faith, family, purpose, and dignity with the tools you had. I want you to know this. Nothing about your attraction to men ever diminished your goodness, your faith, or your worth. The years you spent suppressing, negotiating, disciplining, and denying your desire were not wasted years. They were years of endurance, years of restraint that took extraordinary strength, the years of carrying complexity without collapsing. Yes, there is grief here. Of course there is. Grief for the stairs you never walked down, for the words you never spoke, for the touch you delayed, for the version of yourself who had to wait so long to exhale. That grief deserves tenderness, not judgment. And alongside that grief, I want you to see something else. I want you to see the boy who loved bravely in silence, the teenager who found refuge in imagination when reality wasn't safe, the young man who sought meaning and goodness, even when it cost him intimacy, the adult who kept listening, quietly, patiently, until the truth became undeniable. Your attraction to men was never the enemy. It was a compass. Even when it conflicted with your beliefs, it kept pointing you toward connection, honesty, and love. At 60, you don't need to apologize to your past self. You don't need to correct him. You don't need to explain him away. You can thank him. Thank him for surviving. Thank him for protecting your heart until the world and you were ready to receive it. Thank him for holding desire with care instead of contempt, even when the language around him demanded shame. And please hear this clearly. Your capacity to love men, from childhood curiosity to adult commitment, is not something you overcame. It is something you carried, something you honored slowly, something you learned to trust. That long arc didn't make you late. It made you deep. Nothing was lost. It was transformed. You are not behind. You are not broken. You're not disqualified. You are a man who learned how to love under pressure and eventually how to love without apology. With gentleness, respect, and gratitude for every version of you that got you here, I see you, and I'm glad you stayed. With compassion, yourself. If you get anything from this video, may it be this. Take some time to reflect on what was missing in your past, in your romantic history, maybe the messiness of it all. But also, please take some time, maybe even more time than the regret and the feelings of loss, to give yourself grace, forgiveness, and compassion. If you're watching this and you realize you don't want to navigate this alone, these feelings, these desires that you've had, maybe this coming out for the first time or affirming who you are in a more empathetic, compassionate way, please reach out to me. I've opened a few spots to have some free introductory sessions, so I'll include the information below. So please reach out to me if you're in that position. That's what I want to do with my time because of the struggle I had for so long to come out, to be okay with who I was. A lot of what I want to do now is just to help other people on that same journey. So please contact me if you want. And I also wanted to ask you to subscribe. Many of you have, as you watch this series, but my partner was saying that people may not realize that subscribing just means that you might get my new videos that come out in your feed. And it also helps you find it and you kind of bookmark this channel. So it doesn't mean I'm going to be sending you a bunch of stuff. If you want that, you can contact me and sign up for my newsletter. The next episode here will be about the coming out process as reflected in the Heated Rivalry series. And hopefully I will have a colleague to do this with me, somebody who is an athlete as well in college and has a story to tell about coming out. And so if not, it'll just be me talking about my journey and using clips from Heated Rivalry to kind of depict what I was going through. All right, well, good to have you with me, and I will see you next time. All right, bye.